So who is the greatest of all time? Is it Tolkien or is it Sanderson? Well, this video is partly in response to a video put out a little while ago by Daniel Green. If you haven't gone and checked out his channel before, you should. Maybe give that a subscribe. He does a great job over there, uploads nearly every day. But a while ago, he kind of asked this question. It was in a video about why you should read the Stormlight Archive. Obviously, you should read the Stormlight Archive, but in that, he talked about who should be considered the greatest of all time. Is it Tolkien? Is it Sanderson? Well, as he says, it may be a little bit early to say that Sanderson is the greatest of all time. Although, as he says, it is a reasonable argument to make. So he has a really interesting analogy that he uses to talk about who might be the greatest of all time. And for him, it's boxing and Muhammad Ali versus Mike Tyson. That's kind of the matchup that he uses to discuss whether it's Tolkien or Sanderson. I like this analogy for a few different reasons, but I want to take it a little bit different way and see what you guys think of this analogy. I've been using this for a little while. If you haven't heard it yet, that's great. If you have, my apologies. But I like to think of buildings as stories. Now, buildings have been around for a long, long time, and you can see a clear natural progression all the way from huts and lean-tos to houses and mansions and castles and all the way up. And this is a lot like what stories are like as well. Some are grand, some are small. They all serve some sort of purpose, whether that's entertainment or enlightenment or somewhere in between. And there's always been a progression, in building materials and designs and all that stuff. And you have different types of buildings in different places. But then one day there was a quantum leap forward in the type of building that was being created, and we got the skyscraper. And in my analogy here, Tolkien is the first architect of a skyscraper. He decides, you know what, I'm going to take all these old storytelling techniques and styles and put them all together, and I'm going to make a grand building. For him, it was this mythology, right? Middle-earth. And so you got the Lord of the Rings. Well, the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit and the Silmarillion all working together as this one mythology, this one world that he created. He calls it subcreation. So every time an author subcreates now, I'm thinking of it as they're building a building. Well, that's great, and he did a fantastic job, and he obviously created this blueprint for I don't know how many dozens of other authors to come along and create their own skyscrapers. So you have all these other authors. You have Terry Brooks and David Eddings, and Robert Jordan comes along in the 90s and decides to build his own massive skyscraper. But then along comes Brandon Sanderson, and this is where Sanderson is a little bit different from everybody else. He says, you know what, that skyscraper is really cool. But you know what would be really cool is if I could build an entire city full of these things on my own. And you know what? He was right. It is really cool. But there's a difference. There's a key difference between the two. Going back to that Daniel video, he makes a great point that Brandon is really good at taking what's been done before and doing it better. Well, you can argue whether he's done it better. I'm not sure. You can make your own judgment on that. But he's certainly doing it a lot faster and perhaps more ambitiously, because he's taking that single building concept and he's expanding it out to this entire city that we could call Kazmir City, where you have different skyscrapers like Mistborn and the Stormlight Archive and Warbreaker and Elantris, and you have all these different skyscrapers going up to create this cityscape that you can walk through and you can gaze up and look at the buildings. It's all really fantastic. Obviously, at the Legendarium, we're huge fans of Brandon's and we love his work. But let's keep talking about the difference, because there is a difference between the two. Brandon's buildings are all really cool. They are inventive within a certain structure. As Daniel says in his video, he's not out to reinvent the wheel or do anything incredibly new. He's just doing it bigger, better, faster. They have these slightly different designs that are really fun to look up at and wander among and to go into and explore. But then you compare that to Tolkien's Middle-earth, where it's a single solitary lone structure. And you think to yourself, well, that is, it's kind of boring. But then you walk into the building and you realize how much love and care went into the construction, the design of the building. And so if you study Tolkien and the way that he wrote his books and his stories, his mythology, then you understand, like, as you're walking through this building, he has, you might see the banister, and he says, well, that banister isn't quite right. And where most authors like Sanderson might say, you know what, the banister is good enough. I got to move on because I need to keep this building construction going. Tolkien says, nope, tear the banister out. We're going to build something entirely different here. I'm going to make this banister look even better than it did before. Same thing with the crown molding up on the top, and same thing with, the carpets. We need to make sure the carpets are laid just right. And so a single building might come off as somewhat less ambitious until you look inside and see just how much care went into each and every aspect of that building, or this story, as is the case here. And by doing it with that much care, Tolkien left behind a blueprint for everyone else to follow. He was kind of a weird mixture of looking back into the past with the old stories that he used, and also looking forward into the future with this new way that fantasy stories could be told and could be consumed. And so Tolkien has created this entire blueprint for everyone else to follow, Brandon included. And so when it comes to the question of who is the greatest of all time, in my mind, it's no contest. That has to be Tolkien. Now, if you want to argue about who is best, that's a question that is much more live and much more personal. I'm fine with someone arguing that Sanderson is the best that ever was, because ultimately, that's a subjective question that's going to be up to you. Now, in my opinion, Tolkien isn't just the greatest that ever was, he is also the best. But I'm happy to keep my mind open on that. With Daniel, I'm going to kind of wait and see how Brandon's career goes before I decide whether he is better for me than Tolkien's. We'll see. For now, Tolkien retains the throne, but I'm curious to see what you guys think. So hit the comments below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. Follow along, and make sure you go check out the podcast and our Patreon and all that stuff. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.